Welcome to the Living Superhuman Fitness Podcast, where we take you inside our gym, CrossFit Palm Beach, each week. It's here that we are creating new superhumans every day, transforming people's lives, helping them reach a level of health they never knew possible. We strive to answer your most burning questions on fitness, health, nutrition, training, motivation, mindset, lifestyle, and more. If you have a question, please email us at info@crossfitpalmbeach.com. You can also learn more on our blog, livingsuperhuman.com. And if you have a moment, we'd love a review from you on iTunes. All right, it's time. Let's stop being average and start living superhuman. All right, guys, welcome to today's episode of the Living Superhuman Fitness Podcast. My name is Andrew Frezza, and I'm here with
Dominic Scalza,
Whitney Stevenson.
And today's topic, we're going to be talking about the difference between practice, training, and competition as it relates to CrossFit. So we're just going to start things off and kind of give a little definition of what we mean by practice versus training versus competition. And then we'll go into detail about how you can use the different approaches for each one to your advantage to get more out of your daily workouts and weekly, monthly workouts. So starting with practice, first off, practice is kind of like your technique work, your skill development. A lot of different attributes to practice. The thing that sticks out to me is it shouldn't be very taxing from a aerobic standpoint or energy standpoint. It should be mainly focused on technique and trying to improve and get more efficient at your movement. So probably will have a low heart rate when you're doing something that looks like practice.
Yeah, I think when you're practicing or when you're doing a practice of something, it's more of like a drill, you know, where you're drilling, you're dialing in your skill, and you want to be working with like the best technique or the best strategy you can possibly go with. You kind of like have a plan, you're not really abandoning it because you want to really like work to your full capacity in that moment.
Yeah, the thing that sticks out to me too is you almost like assume failure is going to happen during a practice session. So like a simple example in CrossFit would be double unders. Like if I don't have my double unders and I'm going to go practice them for 20 or 30 minutes, I assume that most of that is going to be pretty ugly. There's going to be a lot of failed reps. I'm probably going to whip myself a few hundred times. But the assumption is at the end of that 30-minute session, hopefully going into it, I could string together one in a row, but my goal at the end would be to string together 3 or 4 in a row. But it might take me a longer time to achieve what seems like a small goal in that period of time.
Yeah, and you're not like rushing through those little segments. Like if you fail a double under and you continuously fail, like maybe you step back and you take a break. Like whenever I coach somebody with swimming, or if I'm swimming myself and like I want to work on a drill to improve my stroke or my technique, like I'm not going to go at a pace where my heart rate is elevated and I'm absolutely exhausted, unless like that's the intent. But that's more of like a training aspect versus practice is you want to be able to kind of work perfectly as much as you can.
Cool. So let's go on to training and just give a brief overview of that. We'll come back to practice a little bit more. So training is kind of the next level up. I think in terms of the perceived effort in training, it could vary a lot. It could be that low heart rate work that does look a little bit more like practice, but generally it's going to be a moderate to high effort. And usually you're focusing more on, first of all, implementing the skills that were developed in practice and kind of ingraining those skills. Those skills become a part of you as you begin to train them more and more and do them in maybe a high heart rate setting or under a little bit of fatigue. And in training, we're not always trying to reserve something in the tank, but generally you're going more at 80 to 90%, and there may be 10 or 15% that you kind of hold back for most days of training. That's not true of every day, but it's the key difference between training and competition.
Yeah, I mean, training is like really where you kind of find out who you are like as an athlete. So it's like I wouldn't even say like more like 70 to that 90% where you're like, okay, today I'm gonna go at 70%, see how that feels. like next week I'm gonna go at 9, and you're like, wow, none of those feel good. Like what's in the middle? And you're like 80%, and then you try it that day. Just kind of learning who you are and who, like if you're with a training partner, how they perceive like how to work out. So if they're like, I'm gonna go 85 today, see how that works against competition. So really, again, just kind of falling into that, kind of learning how to train your body appropriately for what's to come later on in the week or for a competition in the future or whatever that might be.
Yeah, I agree. It's kind of where you get to know yourself and like what you're doing, because it is the majority of what we do. It's the majority of like the WOD is coming in and training, and kind of how you have more of a range of, I guess, percentages that you're going to be working from within your training, just depending on what you're going through.
Cool. So let's move on to competition and give you guys a little definition of that. Competition is really that next level where all that work we put into training, we're really seeing what we're capable of. We're testing our full potential, and we're no longer worrying about maybe how we're moving necessarily in terms of like quality of movement. A lot of that goes by the wayside. What we're really worried about is how can we put the best score on the board for that given day or that given event, that given workout. And in competition, I think this quote by Rich Froning sums it up. But in training, you listen to your body. In competition, you tell your body to shut up. So you're basically going 110%, and you're seeing what the fruit of that labor is that you put into training, hopefully for the last couple months or years.
Yeah, I think you could definitely have like a little bit of, I don't want to say like reckless abandon, but you have a sense of that when you're competing. It's a little bit more, I don't know, free or intense, or you're just tapping into a different system that you're not always tapping into when you're training, but because you've trained a certain way, you know you have that foundation to kind of like push the limits a little bit more.
So to help you guys kind of understand a little bit deeper what we're talking about, we wanted to kind of relate this to other sports. So we all played sports growing up. Whitney was a swimmer, Dominic was big into lacrosse, and myself in baseball, and we've all kind of dabbled with other sports as well. And I think when people look at CrossFit, they have a tendency to just kind of see it as its own thing and not be able to relate it to other sports. So in a lot of other sports, you're not competing every day. I think, none of us played football necessarily as our primary sport, but football is an easy example. There's 16 games in a season. Most people know that you're pretty much going to play every Sunday for 16 weeks in a given football season. But during the week, those other 6 days, you might have 2 or 3 days that are lighter, that are more practice oriented, where you are studying film, or you're walking through drills and doing stuff like that. And then a couple days a week, you're going through more fast-paced drills, or maybe conditioning drills that looks more like training, where you're trying to build your aerobic system, or you're trying to get on the same page with your quarterback if you're a receiver, or maybe work on tackling and things like that in a high-speed environment. And then that once a week, you compete, and these guys compete on broken ankles and broken arms because they are just, that's their job, first of all, but that's the time to kind of forget about everything else and just go out and perform. And I think that's an easy way to think about it. And I think one of the things that we see in CrossFit, because we don't have, not all of us have a sport that we're training for, and most of us don't. We just kind of do CrossFit to be better at life. We treat CrossFit as our competition. And a lot of times we see people that come in and compete every single day, and they have no days that are focused on skill. They have no days that are focused on training. It is 100% competition 100% of the time. And that leads to a lot of bad things that could potentially happen.
Yeah, I mean, that's where like you get like injuries come into play too, but something like cool, just going basic on like for the CrossFit aspect, is that it doesn't have to be a competition every day, but it also like where you're learning that training side of things, where you're doing that 80%, and then you see that one workout that you're like, hey, like you get the week ahead and you're like, hey, Friday looks like a day where I can kind of push myself to that limit today. Especially if you don't have any competitions coming up, and you need that feeling again, just to kind of see where you're at and how training's going, and then you can use that competitive advantage to kind of like hit that 95%, 100%, whatever you want to call it, and to where you are laying on the ground and you're like, that's like as hard as I can go. You know, and I would honestly recommend maybe doing that once a month, if that. Like, it's just when it feels right, kind of doing that until, depending on your schedule with that, you know. But you can use that in any way.
Yeah, I think the key is being very decisive about which days are going to be those days and which ones aren't, so you're not feeling the pressure of the whiteboard on those other days and saying, oh, I got to beat this guy, I got to beat this guy. And it's not that you're holding back on those other days, but most of us have an understanding that when it becomes that competition, we give that little extra. We maybe don't worry quite as much about our form or our technique. And I think that's one of the key elements of training is once technique breaks down past a certain point, maybe 5 or 10% in terms of like 100% scale, you should be resting, you should be stopping, you should be doing things that's going to protect your long-term future, not just put the best score on the whiteboard that day. Like a simple example is like if you're someone who has muscle ups and you start to really chicken wing your muscle ups, it's probably a better idea in a training environment to just rest, because now you're ingraining that habit of that chicken wing to put a better score on the board today, where you probably want to just back off, keep the quality up, and you're still going to get a great workout. Maybe it's not going to leave you quite on the ground as much as you would, but you'll still get a great workout and you'll improve because of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely a fine line between like competition and training. And like when I swam, it was really easy for me to like empty the tank every day. And if you're doing that over and over and over again, and it's easy to do it in the gym here too, you don't allow time to recharge. You don't allow time to fill the tank back up so you can truly empty it again. You don't allow time for batteries to recharge, or, you know, to fine tune those skills that you need to develop a little bit more, maybe strengths you need to develop a little bit more, so you can really increase your potential. And I think that's where that line between competing and training is like very fine. Like you have to be able to kind of toe the line a little bit and then be able to back off and be okay with it, and know that like, hey, maybe I can't, you know, RTG the workout today because it is muscle ups and I only can do one single. So I'm going to do something else and work on that strength. And then, you know, maybe when this comes around next month or whatever, I'm going to push it a little bit more here. And that's kind of bringing that awareness into your training every day, wherever you can, you know, like I'm not feeling great, my ankle's bothering me, so I'm going to skip out on the dubs today. Or, you know, just being able to kind of still challenge yourself, but know that in order to reach your full potential, like you really need to, you know, build that bucket so you can fill it more and then empty it, not just continue emptying this like shallow pan of water.
Yeah, I think that's key. I think like I think a lot of people compete because they want a goal to shoot for, and I think when it comes to training, if they feel like, oh, if I'm not going to be the best score on the board or do a certain level, then, you know, what's motivating me? But I think in training specifically, you can have goals that aren't related to necessarily putting up the very best score on the board. So it could be like, okay, today we had 25 wall balls in the workout, and it could be, okay, I'm gonna make sure I do all my 25 unbroken. And maybe that's your goal for the day. Or for someone who's not quite as strong, is 15 and 10. I'm gonna hold myself to that 15 and 10 no matter what, and that's gonna be my training goal for today. If nothing else goes right, I'm gonna do that right. Or maybe it's pacing your rounds and say, okay, I'm gonna stick to a very specific pace on my rounds and see if I can hold that. So, you know, maybe you're someone who always comes out hot in a workout, and then you tend to hit a wall midway through that workout. So maybe today you say, I'm gonna go extra slow on the first round and see how that affects me in rounds 2, 3, and 4. And did that result in what I think would have been a better score than if I would have done my usual go all out and just try to hold on to it. So training is your opportunity to take different approaches and set goals that aren't related to necessarily having the very, very best score on the board.
Yeah, maybe the goal isn't, or it's not related to competing and winning like that day, but it's related to competing in the long term. You know, like actually maximizing your potential when you compete down the road versus like just beating yourself up every day after day.
Yeah, and I'm just gonna like just kind of side noting that, coming back to like the all three that we were talking about. Something cool, like I know that I kind of put into my stuff, and like my coach does for me, but just looking at it, and we have it for our classes too, but using all three of these in your, like, just say again, weekly training. So it's like Monday, I have a training day. Like that's my day. Or Monday morning is. Monday afternoon is more of like a practice, more skill stuff, just steady pace, just kind of really like relaxing, getting through the movements, getting quality movements in there. Tuesday is like skill first, like the practice first, and then it's like you're gonna train a little bit and then you're gonna go pretty hard. Like that's kind of how it is. And then the rest of the week is just kind of train, more skill stuff, and then usually nothing else the rest of the week. It's all kind of about really similar with that. And then as we get more towards like the open, there's a little bit more competitive things in there as we get kind of towards that and needing to use those energy systems or getting towards like competing days. So just knowing that like this is not like a one-day thing where you're like, I'm gonna practice today and I'm gonna train today. Like that's where it differs with like sports. Like I know in lacrosse, we would play games usually on every like Saturday or sometimes on a Sunday, but for the most part during the week we'd have 1 or 2 games and nothing on the weekend, or one on Tuesday, one on Sunday, or one on Saturday. So it was like kind of all over the place, but it was a decent schedule for the most part. But when we would do that, like Monday would always be like a conditioning day, but like with just like a straight aerobic day and like a practice day. So it was like just kind of walk through stuff, and then like Tuesday was like go really hard because, or it was a game, but like for like pre-game stuff, it was like this is kind of our game day. We have to emulate playing in a game. And then Wednesday was like kind of practice and then like some training stuff. Thursday was more just kind of like training, and then Friday was like okay, practice, taper down. Saturday, kill each other. It was like that was like a scrimmage day, you know. And then we'd repeat every week, you know. So it was like it's very much like that. And some weeks again would vary depending on everything, again, just like CrossFit. But I see where that does differ with CrossFit, or with regular sports, is where you can emulate that in one day because what you're doing is essentially training your body, getting your body ready for something, or whether it's for looking fantastic or performing or doing both, whatever you're trying to, whatever your goal is. But that is where we can kind of take it in the fitness side of things and kind of see it blossom and see it work to like its fullest potential, you know, and where we're not completely broken at the end of the week, like football or like I still have a broken toe and I've had it for 6 years, and like whatever.
I thought it looked funny. I didn't want to say anything.
Yeah. So like, but that happens. Like we all had broken everything when we played. It's just normal.
Yeah, I think there's like a saying in most sports which is like no one's ever at 100%,
yeah.
And that's because on competition day everyone's a little beat up and they're always kind of playing through some kind of pain.
Yeah. When I swam, like my season was basically a year, so we would only taper down and rest for one big meet. So we would have like a year training cycle leading up. So it was a lot of work. But within that year, we were still competing. So you're still going to meets, but the approach was a little bit differently. They were actually using those competitions as more of a training versus the actual competition where you shave down, you suit up, there's a difference between like a dual meet versus like when I was swimming for UM or USC, when I was swimming against UCLA or I don't know, the schools over here, FGCU or FSU, and then going into NCAAs or going into the Olympic trials. Like those were the meets that you were competing at. And even though you're still competing at these dual meets, these smaller swim meets, they were taken as more of a training. You were approaching them differently. You knew that they were a training for the competition. So it wasn't like everything's on the line at this meet. You weren't wearing your racing suit. You weren't shaved down, but you still approached it with that same kind of mindset.
It's like a dress rehearsal.
Yeah, like a dress rehearsal, which I think that for a lot of the people in the competitors class, you can take, every few weeks and really kind of approach that workout like a dress rehearsal if you want to be competitive, or maybe you're just pushing yourself that extra mile once a month, where it's not necessarily a competition for who's who on the whiteboard, but like within yourself, like what have I done to prepare myself for today's training, and like what is the one mental thing I want to focus on for today's training that I know that I need to work on if I want to compete or when the next competition is.
Yeah, I think the key thing that you guys both said was like balance, basically having that balance of it's always better to skew it in the more direction of practice and training versus competition. When we overdo it in the competition, that's when we can get burnout, we can get the injuries, and all those different things. And one of the things that I see in the classes, Dom mentioned CrossFit's kind of unique, and it is unique. Most other sports would use something that looks similar to CrossFit to get ready for their sport. So for us, if CrossFit is our sport, we're doing CrossFit to kind of get ready for that sport and train for that sport and practice for that sport. So it's all kind of one and the same. But like in our class, as an example, we might have a skill session, which is kind of like your practice, and then we might have a workout, which that workout, if it's a regular day, might be your training day. Whereas if it's a benchmark workout, it might be your competition day. It might be one of those days that you decide, okay, this is one day out of the next week or two that I am gonna give it everything I got, and it's gonna be more of a competition day. So a lot of people that I see is they kind of neglect that skill work. I think they take it for granted because they may think it's for beginners, or they may think it's not for them. And as coaches, we're always picking up on stuff. Even when we hear our other coaches in this gym explain stuff, we're always picking up on new cues or new ways of thinking about something, and we're always learning from each other. So I think approaching that warm up and that beginning of class as being wanting to learn and being willing to learn is really key, because that really might be the only time you get to have one of those practice sessions if you're not coming in outside of your 60 minutes in class.
Yeah, I mean, practice and training are your foundation for competition. So if you're never dialing in the skills and taking the time to step back and practice and drill, and then you're not really bringing any awareness to your training, you're not varying your percentages based on how you feel, you're not working on, who you mentally are in your workouts and in your training. If you're just constantly going to compete mode, you're gonna have this house that has no foundation. And once you get into a position where something knocks you on your feet and you can't compete, you have no foundation to hold you up. You're just gonna be knocked over, and you're gonna be frustrated, like, well, why am I doing this? Well, why isn't this? Well, why did this person beat me? And you kind of just take yourself out of the game.
Yeah, and I think it's okay to have like an off season too. Maybe it's not gonna be 3-month period where you don't work out, but maybe it's just more of a mental off season where you show up, you have fun with the workouts, you kind of go through the motion. Maybe you do a little bit more focus on your technique because you're not focused so much about your score on the board. It's a little bit more skill oriented. But I think it's okay to have that mental off season, whether it's a week or two or whether it's a couple months, where you just really just have fun with the workouts, you enjoy it. And if your goal is really just to be a better person outside the gym, or maybe do well in a couple competitions a year, you can definitely afford to have that off season, and you're going to benefit from it in the long term. You're going to stay in the game a lot longer.
Yeah, I mean I think that's the only way to stay in the game a lot longer. Like, actually, it's not possible to not. You will get burned out 100%, like scientifically proven. Like, at any coach's certification, anything talking about a program design style, if you don't, you're like, it's just kind of like, hey, when's that day that this is going to be over? That's like really kind of how it is. And just coming from, just like knowing, just like our members, we'll just say, just make it easier. But let me just throw a weird number out there, but like 88% of our members love team sports. So like they all watch football, or they all watch whatever it is, or even golf, not team sports, but still something with athleticism that you have to put the time in for. There's always an off season where they are not doing anything, or if they're going to play golf, they're chilling and they're playing. They're just out there at the driving range, like with the practice. Lacrosse, lacrosse is a little different because they really like to party, but like their off season is like 3 months, and it's just like there's no lacrosse. Maybe once every 2 months there's like this summer league tournament, and everyone gets together and has a lot of fun. Like, that's just more for like the community aspect. But like football, when I played football, same thing. Like, you needed to take off. Like, football is a lot longer off season because of how like detrimental it is to your body, because you are going 100% in competition just because of the way that it's run, the way the stop and go is. You're able to go a lot more 100% at a lot of times throughout the game. So I think for the longevity in anything, you need off season.
Definitely.
Without a doubt.
So I feel like we've kind of been knocking the competition side a little bit through this episode, but what are some things that you guys love about competing? And we all compete in one way or another in CrossFit. So what are some things that are good about competing that you may not get in just your typical training or practice session?
I mean, I think you get that extra little like adrenaline rush that pushes you to do something maybe you didn't think was possible or you didn't think you were capable of doing. For me, I do like that feeling of like being able to be a little bit more like free in what I'm about to go and like attack, and have that a little bit of like reckless abandon and a little bit more of that, I guess, just sense of trust of like what I've been doing over and over again is going to carry me through, you know, whatever it is, if it's a weekend competition or a 1 hour competition. And yeah, I mean, I think anytime that you accomplish something that kind of is daunting or challenging, or you didn't maybe think you could complete it, is so rewarding. Like it's always worth it.
Yeah, I think even though the competition may only make up, like, let's say less than 5% of your given work that you put in, it's going to make the other 95% have so much more meaning and so much more purpose, and you're going to get that much more out of it. I mean, I know when I compete, I can pretty much count on like a 5 or 10% increase in performance, and that's really cool because you have that adrenaline, you may have more people watching you, and when you get used to that feeling, you can pretty much count on that leading to a PR or a better performance in a workout that you wouldn't normally get no matter how hard you try in your daily activities.
Yeah, I mean, I'm getting jacked up thinking about this right now. I don't know if anyone can see this.
I can feel it.
Like I'm, like steam coming off me. I love competing, and for me, I don't really compete that much. I mean more throughout the day-to-day stuff, but like I'll do maybe 1 to 2 competitions a year. Like I try to go for a little bit more, but I really don't. Like I've done CrossFit for 3 years. I've done like 6 competitions, not including the Open. So like compared to a lot of other people I know, some people that have been doing it just as long as I have done like literally like 50, 60 competitions, which that's a little ridiculous. That's not needed. But and my body can handle a lot, but not like that, you know. And I love to see like kind of like what he said, just what I'm capable of. And then when I have moments in my head like passing through right now, but like just thinking about those times and like where like the Open, like the 16.
Yeah, I remember that last workout. That was popping into my head.
Dead, like absolutely dead. But and then like the next day of training, or like not the next day, 3 days later, I was like I was still flying high from that. Maybe not like in my head, like it maybe like more like my subconscious, but like training went really well after that, and I was like, I feel good. Like I could keep going. Like I feel really good. And then it was off season, so it was like, okay, I'm good to go. But I just know it carries over for those next few weeks or week or whatever it is into your training, which just betters you that much more.
Yeah.
And again, and also like for our thing for CrossFit, just that community aspect. When you go to compete, like I competed against this one guy, like I never met him, we just knew each other's names, and then we competed next to each other, beat each other. He beat me, I beat him more than he beat me, and competitive. And now we're friends. We are friends, and every time I see him, like before I was just like, oh, I kind of know him just because his name, and that was it. But now like we are pretty good friends from that, and it's cool. And even like Zach, like our other coach, we only knew each other from competing, and now we work together. We're great friends. Like it's just cool, like just to see how that kind of like worked about just by competing with each other.
I think one of the biggest things for me, because I used to compete, that's basically what brought me through college, was competing and swimming, was that whenever I would compete, when I swam, there was always like some fear. And I still have it, like I still get a little bit of nerves, I still get fear, but like throughout competing now, I have a new mindset where I can learn from it. Even if I do fail or I don't meet my expectation or maybe I just miss my goal, like I know how to kind of like reflect and look at that and then kind of move forward from that, where before it was more of like, oh, I'm just disappointed, I don't know why I'm doing this, there was just a mental block that I had before. And I think that throughout laying like a good foundation, like we talked about with training and practice, like when you do get to those moments where you do compete and push the limits a little bit, it doesn't matter what you're met with. If you're met with success or failure or whatever, you can walk away from it feeling fulfilled, which is for me like really awesome. And now when I compete, I always look at it as like an opportunity, because like I still feel the nerves, whether I'm just deciding to compete in the gym next door on a weekend or if I'm at the Granite Games, like the nerves are still there. They're pretty much the same. And now I can look at how I deal with them a little bit better.
Cool. Anything yet to add? I think we'll end it there.
Yeah.
Why don't you sign up for the Better Half?
Yeah. If this episode airs before the Better Half, sign up for the Better Half Battle, November 19th.
And really compete.
Practice.